Hey, what's up guys? Node Investor here. It is Friday, February 14th, 2020, and we are going to look at the resilient crypto bull. The bulls are loving it. The price continues to show some resilience here. Every dip continues to be bought up. Yes, a lot of these alts are a little bit extended near term. It's a matter of when, not if, we'd finally see a little bit of a meaningful correction and pause, but for now, the bulls continue to show the resilience, no love for the bears, and the trend is still your friend. So we're going to look at the price of Bitcoin today. I'm going to look at the big picture again. We mentioned this in the last video. For those of you that caught that, I was talking about some of the BTC dominance numbers, some potential rotation, things to be watching, and we haven't really hit that big upside target in Bitcoin. Big picture number that I was looking for here near term was, anywhere between 10.5 to 11,000, and it's just kind of been sitting tight here for the last couple of days. But if you zoom in the charts, a lot of these are continuing to just coil up, set up for another potential run. And where do we go from here? It's important to note the big picture here. Going to the crypto market cap, it's had a very good run since the start of the year. We started the year right around that $185 billion market cap and just has seen a very nice steady climb, hitting that $300 billion mark here this week. The BTC dominance finally pulled into that 62% number that I was looking for. If we zoom out a little bit here, this is the last kind of big tops before the breakout over that 62%. Pulling right in, and that just continues to be confirmed with the altcoin dominance that we're seeing here in recent weeks, which is fantastic. Bitcoin price is going up, alts are going up even faster. Generally speaking, that's the type of correlation we enjoy seeing here in the crypto space. It's a nice change from the prior year and a half. If for those of you that were watching the space closely, it wasn't always that way. It was certainly that way during the last big bull run where the altcoins were outperforming, but we hit a little patch there where Bitcoin rallied, alts got hit, Bitcoin pulled back, alts got hit, and it was just a really tough season all around. But right now, it certainly is that alt season. I hesitate to use that phrase, but it's certainly seeing that big altcoin outperformance. And it seems like these days, it's just a matter of when, not if, the altcoin will rally versus Bitcoin. And so I'm starting to feel a little bit of that sentiment across the space, that over aggressiveness, and I think it's good to be aggressive right now. The bull is still very much moving higher. The trend is your friend, but just be mindful of that. There is a high degree of correlation in the space, and when it finally decides to take a breather, it's going to be the majority of names following suit, not just Bitcoin and the big cap names. We could see some rotation into the small cap names, but in general, there's just a big rotation, a big correlation. And if things move higher, as they say, rising tides lift all boats. But the same is true, especially here in the crypto space, where you will get the sharp pullback and it'll be across the board. So it's just important to remember that. It's always interesting when I start to see the high fives on Twitter and the back patting. People are kind of saying, "Oh, I called this and I called that." That's great and all, but I mean, let's be honest. Everything is moving up together. Some of it is good technical analysis. Some of it is just the market in general moving in tandem. It's just a matter of which names, right? Which names are outperforming, which ones are the better ones to be on at the moment. But we're seeing it just kind of green everywhere. Big performances. If we look at names like ETH, BTC, big move off of that double bottom, continues to look well. Names like Link finally breaking out of that pattern that we were looking at the start of the week, moving higher. Litecoin holding up very well versus Bitcoin. Neo having a good day here today. A lot of the Asian names, Ontology looking strong, Quantum, OMG, VeChain. And so it's just really across the board. I mean, that's the point I'm trying to make here. Looking at Tron finally breaking out. And so those dips just continue to be viable. The dips continue to be places that hold pullbacks to these moving averages, and they just continue to bounce, take out the next resistance level. And so until that changes, the trend is your friend. But there are some names that are certainly starting to look a little bit extended. I mean, these are the daily charts, and many of these alt BTC pairs have gone from one extreme to the other. You look at the RSI was way in the oversold level. Now it's way up here in the overbought levels as prices have really had a really steep run. Now we know that crypto likes to go parabolic, and has those big climactic moves, and we're starting to see some of those here. And it's just a matter of when do we finally get to that breather. But they're just the stair stepping, right? You get the pauses, the next leg higher, the pause, Bitcoin Cash here today, another break higher. And so all across the space, big cap names, small cap names, they're all just doing this. ELF moving up, Engine sitting tight here, looking like it wants to break higher. ETH, we looked at that one. Icon still pulling back after that tremendous run we saw here for a couple of weeks, but right back to the moving averages, looking for a potential bounce on that one. So just very quickly going through some of those names, you can get a feel for just what the last several weeks has looked like in the space, and it's been good. But just don't get complacent, because these markets, as we know, can turn very quickly. And so still looking on the long side of things. I took a quick scalp to the short side on XRP yesterday, but for the most part, just still looking to the long side of things here. These names are a little bit extended, of course, on all fronts, but look at them on the short-term time frames. You look at these 1 hour charts, they're starting to set up these little ascending bases. ETH is breaking out of one here today. So on the short-term time frames, you're seeing these little pauses, these breathers, and they're not really just selling off. They're just, every time there's a wick to the downside, they get bought up, and we're starting to see finally a little bit of edging out here today. In the near term, Bitcoin saw a pretty little, I mean, it's a small drop in comparison, right? We went from 10.5 down to around 10.1, but it was pretty quick, and it was very choppy yesterday, a lot of wicks, and just has been in a little bit of a range here, with the upside of that range being 10.3, the downside being 10.1. And so for now, it's just range bound. It looks like it wants to have another quick move up. 10.5 would be your first resistance. And then if it can hold above that, I'm looking for a run to 11,000. But I am cautious considering the run that we've had for that, what I call the pop and drop scenario, where you get that last kind of big run, the FOMO really kicks in, people start chasing it there. The shorts that were smelling blood yesterday are getting squeezed, and you get them covering, and then there's the big sell-off. So I'm always mindful of those scenarios. Potentially we could see that here play out, especially on the 4 hour chart. If we go to that real quick, you know, this little divergence continues to play out here in the near term. Again, it's not an automatic sell, but certainly something to make note of. You're seeing that momentum continuing to slide here on the RSI as price continues to make higher highs. And so something I'm going to be watching for is if we do get that pop over 10.5, closer to 10.8, you know, how does it react at that point? Is there a lot of distribution at these levels? And then does that set up for a little bit more of a meaningful correction? To date, we've not seen anything near that. It's just been steady. The last real, what I would consider big correction, if even that, was that big pullback we saw from 9,100 down to the 8,300 level. There was that small double bottom, and it's just kind of been off to the races since then. Hasn't even closed below the daily 10 EMA for the last 2 weeks or so, and so it's been a very strong run. And you know, eventually we'll get a little bit of a pause, but for now, the bulls remain in control. The bears that continue to step in front of this are certainly feeling some heat. If you know, kind of shorting, and I don't have anything against shorting. In fact, I mean, I do it from time to time. But you know, look at the lower time frames. Start looking for that signs of distribution. You saw potential setup here for ETH, for example. There was a lot of big selling showing up, but it never really followed through. And so, if you're gonna look for some downside action, it's always best to either wait for the trend to finally turn or look for these signs of distributions, potential double tops starting to form, that sort of thing. We had the potential to see that yesterday in a few of these names. It just never really materialized. And now we're getting a little bit of breakout, higher highs, higher lows still, and just ascending bases instead. So has been a healthy consolidation all in all. Going to the node insiders here, still in the green, has been off and on green caution, as some of the lower time frames are showing some yellow. And that's not unusual considering the choppy action we've seen, as well as these indicators tend to reset a little bit when price just goes sideways versus when it's trending up or trending down. And the trading bot strategy, there's two of them on here. There's the daily strategy, the 4 hour. The daily has been long for quite some time now, but the 4 hour I've noticed was getting a little choppy here over the last couple of days. It went flat here yesterday, then long again. So getting a little choppy here in this range. And so that's why for now, I'm just keeping an eye on the broader range for Bitcoin, this level that I marked out here, 10.3 on the upside, 10.1 on the downside. starting to close outside of either one of those will likely set the trend. If we make a lower high here and can't get past over this level and start to break below 10.1, then it's going to start to really look like maybe we're seeing some near-term trend change. But again, looking at the daily chart, it just depends on what your strategy is, what time frame you're looking at. The daily chart still showing no signs of weakness. Yesterday was a pretty big volume day, but again, didn't really follow through to the downside, still well above the daily 10 EMA, which right now sits at around 9,900. And so all in all, bulls remain in control. I do want to point out the weekly chart, though. It's real important to see the big picture, because I do believe we're seeing a beginnings of a very strong move as we head into 2020. Will there be pullbacks along the way? Absolutely. And in fact, I think there'll be good opportunities to continue to accumulate, especially in the altcoin realm. I've not been this positive on the alts for quite some time. We've seen brief periods of alt bounces over the last year and a half, but for the most part, Bitcoin was really the place to be, and that was evident in the Bitcoin dominance just continuing to rise, and the long-term charts of alt BTC pairs have just been demolished. But here in the last several months, we've seen these big bases being established, a big support level, and combined with the big picture chart that we're seeing here in Bitcoin, this big weekly chart that's really starting to coil up, and it's great to see the alts finding a low versus Bitcoin as the price of Bitcoin starts to run. And so I'm still leaning in favor of the alts. I think near term they're due for a pause versus Bitcoin. Maybe we see that dominance number pop a little bit to the upside, but overall the general crypto sphere I think is setting up for a much bigger run going into 2020. Of course, we have the halving. We've broke this recent downtrend here. Again, this is the weekly chart, but we had this big run, the break here. Last year we saw that big spike higher, and then for 6 months just pulled back. But notice where it pulled back to. There was this big support level in 2018 that formed that ultimately broke to the downside. And when we pulled back, we saw price basically retest the upper end of that range here, at the end of last year. And we've been bouncing very nicely since then. Volumes have really started to come back into the space. And all around, you just got to keep that in mind, this kind of big picture view, because I do ultimately believe that we will see the old all-time highs taken out. Does it happen in 2020? It certainly could. Doesn't necessarily have to. I expect we will see last year's highs taken out. So I expect 14K will be taken out this year. Does it go as high as 20? That's really not that much of a stretch after that point. If we do see that taken out, that's another 30%. And you have to keep in mind that in the history of Bitcoin, I know that this is the Binance exchange and it only starts in 2017, but price was below that anyway. In the history of the total Bitcoin trading, there was very little time spent above that 14K level. And in fact, the total volume of Bitcoin traded at that isn't really that high in comparison to some of these other key levels, which why I expect once we finally do take out last year's high at 14K, it'll be a pretty quick run up to 20, and then ultimately we will see new all-time highs. And you can see here there was a handful of weeks spent trading above this level, and even then it was pretty choppy. There was a lot of distribution, and clearly that was the top. We saw the top almost to the day when the futures opened for Bitcoin, and there was a lot of shorting involved, but the altcoins went on a rally after that. But still, you look at the overall month of December and early January, very little time spent on that, and most of the Bitcoin history is below that 14K mark. And so something to watch here, because once we do finally break above that, it will get really interesting. I think the hype will really come back into the space big time. We're already seeing it a little bit with the recent run-up. CNBC's back on the horn. We're getting, the Twitter sphere getting very euphoric. And I think it means well for the overall space, just because there are some key events coming to the forefront. Some of the projects continue to develop. We're seeing the space mature. And so that's all good and well. We'll see if this continues here over the coming months. But dialing it in here again, just looking at the very near term action, it is a little bit choppy here. Just be cautious. Don't get complacent. It's good to be aggressive, but you got to be quick. When the tide finally turns, there's a good chance that it will affect the entire space. And again, it's not necessarily mean go all bear mode at that point, but look for those opportunities to wait for those pullbacks, those pauses along the way. What I'm thinking we might see here in the next couple days, next week or so, is that rotation to continue into these smaller cap names. We've seen the big caps run. They've been on a very nice run. ETH, EOS, Cardano, Tezos continues to make new highs. But we're also starting to see a resurgence in some of these smaller names. You know, we're seeing names that are more obscure, if you will. The micro caps continuing to pop up on the list here. They've been in and out of the list for the last couple of days, but we're seeing them make a broader showing here in terms of the number of small caps leading the way here. So let's take a quick look at some of those charts. Looking at Steam, for example, a name that comes up from time to time during the live streams. You guys want to look at this one, and it has just continued to take out these levels. There was that big breakout that we saw from this level over that 2300, and continues to move higher here the last couple of days, just showing some really good action there. A few names that I posted in a tweet yesterday that were just showing up on the trending list. Data has pulled back, looking for a potential bounce here. It basically pulled right back to this breakout point around that 190 sat level. So look for a potential bounce in that name there. Tomo Chain, for example, was on the list at the start of the week. Still holding up, cleared some resistance, pulling back, but has room to run to the next level around that 6,800 level. Then above that, not a lot of resistance until 7,500. Ren continues to grind higher, but look at how choppy these names are. These are very tough because of lack of liquidity and these very quick moves. I mean, these moves are very fast. Look at down 15% very quickly, you know, back up 8-10% very quickly. So certainly if you can watch them much closer, those will be better for you. But again, they're harder to trade just because of the liquidity. Looking at Raven here, continues to grind higher, broke out, had a few throwbacks down to that breakout point, finally starting to move higher. If we go to the daily chart, this is what I'm liking for the overall alt space though. Things like this, where you see these big bases being built, you see the volume patterns starting to look bullish, the buying volume is really starting to kick in, and they're really starting to come off of these lows. They've got a long ways to go before they're, you know, back in huge uptrends on the weekly charts, but these are the early signs of some good support that's been established, and now we're seeing the volume come in and they're starting to really take off to the upside here. Looking at names like Nano, again, big double bottom, and that one has played out beautifully. Ran up to this first resistance level around that 1040 level, pulled back to the daily 10 EMA, and then just cracking higher here. Next major target are basically these most recent highs that formed this little double top around 1180, and so just huge moves up. But when you put it into perspective, I mean, these are big percentage gains here over the last couple of weeks in very little time. I mean, this is really since the start of February. You've seen a lot of these names up 40%, 50%, and plus in many cases. Elf is another one. Waves has been on a little bit of a move here. I mentioned the Asian names here. So for example, names like Tron looking pretty good here versus BTC, continue to show some good action, and it's just been on a pretty steady climb since breaking this downtrend. That was really the level to be watching. You broke that downtrend, it paused for a little bit, gave you a little bit of time to really evaluate this one, and then really got going. Hit that first target around 235, pulled back, but held the moving averages very nicely. Lower volume on that pullback, and volume's coming back in as it breaks above range and just continues to go higher. Next big target on this one is that 280 level, and then above that around 315, 320, and so certainly has room to run if it wants to continue higher. But just be mindful, the RSIs are getting up there every time it spikes to the upside. This one RSI 80 on the BTC pair. If we look at Tron USD, also showing a little bit of elevated RSI here near 85, and so the risk is just higher at this point of some profit taking, of some pullback. So just something to make note, but they just continue to be very strong names, and certainly these are the ones to watch during those pullbacks to see how they hold up. Where do they land? Do they land at these moving averages? Do they pull back to these breakout points? Because then those generally will present some good secondary entry points to be watching. And so I always make note of what are those names that have been the strongest during the first run up, what are those names that continue to show good relative strength during the pullbacks, and the first ones to come off the bottoms when things start to turn are oftentimes the leaders on the way up here. So just a bunch of different names to be watching. It's really just green across the board. Just don't fall asleep. Don't get complacent, my friends. Things are looking good. enjoy it, but just be mindful of how this is going here, especially if you're active trader, if you're using margin, that sort of thing. You got to be much more vigilant. If you're kind of a longer term holder and looking at the bigger picture, I think the macro picture is looking very positive and things are looking upward for 2020. I hope you guys enjoyed the rest of your day, the rest of your evening, wherever you may be. We'll see you all next week. Take care, everyone.